Here we go. All right. So tonight we're joined by a representative from the Portland Committee for Human Rights in the Philippines, or PCHIRP, which is an organization of Filipino and Filipino American immigrant youth, students, professionals, workers, and allies who work together in solidarity to advance the national democratic movement of the Philippines in the US through education, leadership development, and political action. PCHIRP coordinates with a global network of people's organizations and movements that strive to realize the unity, cooperation, and coordination of anti-imperialist and democratic struggles around the world. So in Portland, PCHIRP organizers lead political education, films, guest speakers, panels, and vigils to bring attention to the worsening conditions of Filipinos in Portland, the US, and in the Philippines. So with us tonight is Jesse Braverman, who's the officer for PCHIRP's Mass Campaigns Committee, to speak about their work fighting fascism and violence against environmental land defenders in the Philippines and the parallels between the resistance against the Duterte regime there and the struggle against police brutality here in the US. So thank you for being here, Jesse.
Thanks so much, Indy, and thanks so much to everyone at 350 PDX for having me today. Like Indy was saying, I'm with the Portland Committee for Human Rights for the Philippines, and we're a grassroots organization fighting to advance the national democratic movement of the Philippines. I organize with our environmental justice desk, which we are actually projecting to launch into a new organization to take up campaigns to defend environmental defenders and their struggles for self-determination and land in the Philippines by the end of this year. It's really great to be with all of you today as climate and environmental defenders to talk about why it's crucial for our movement here in the US to build solidarity with people's struggles all over the world. I'm not sure if Deneen was still going to help share the PowerPoint.
Yes. Yeah, you ready?
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you. And just as a heads up, at the end of my presentation, I'm going to ask folks to take action with me, a photo action actually. So we'll hold signs up together. So I'll share more at the end of the presentation. But for now, I'll just ask folks to, at some point, grab a piece of paper and a marker or a pen just in preparation for that. So we're ready to go together at the end. So I thought that we could start today with a game to get a better sense of how much folks already know about the Philippines. So we just have a few multiple choice questions. When we go through, you can just type your guess into the chat box below. No shame if you don't know the answers. I didn't know that much about the Philippines before I joined PCHIRP, so no expectations. This activity will also help us to start understanding the economic and political significance of the Philippines and why the United States government has so much interest in the country. So if you could hit the next slide. The first question in our game is, where is the Philippines located? Do you think it's located in Africa, Latin America, Southeast Asia, or Europe? Seeing lots of C's. Yes. If you can just click the screen, it'll reveal our answer. You're all correct. The Philippines is located in Southeast Asia. And you can just hit the next slide. And as you'll see on the next slide, the Philippines is located just above the equator, so it's very hot there, very different climate than here in the US. And it's very significant that it's just southeast of China, as it's a very strategic place in the United States' eyes to position itself next to a country it sees as its competitor. So just keeping that in mind. If you hit the next slide, the Philippines, as you can see, is an archipelago and is made up of many, many islands, which brings us to our next question. The Philippines is made up of how many islands? Do you think 3, 200, 700, or 7,000? Seeing some C's, some D's. Good guesses. Deneen, if you could help reveal our answer. The answer is D, over 7,000 islands. And I see Janae saying that it varies on the tides. Yes, you'll hear lots of people joke when they answer this question that it depends on whether it's high tide or low tide to know exactly how many islands there are in the Philippines. But if you hit the next slide, you'll see that the country is divided into 3 major island groups. So Luzon in the north, Visayas in the middle, and Mindanao in the south. I just spent 2 months in the Philippines at the beginning of this year, integrating with peasant organizers, and I spent most of my time in southern Luzon. So you can hit the next slide. For our next question, how many Filipinos do you think live in the United States? See some C's, some D's. Good guesses. If you can reveal our answer, Deneen. 4 million, yes. About 10% of the population of the Philippines actually lives overseas. And each day, about 6,000 Filipinos leave the country in search of work abroad because there aren't enough adequate opportunities for them back home. And with 4 million Filipinos living in the US, the Philippines might be all the way across the world, but we're a lot closer to the country than you might expect. And so if you hit our last slide, yes, just saying again, 4 million Filipinos in the US, 1 million undocumented. And for our last question, what natural resources are located in the Philippines out of this long list? Seeing lots of E's, some A's. Reveal our answer, Deneen. Yes, it's E, all of the above. The Philippines is incredibly rich in natural resources, fertile land, minerals, and forests. One of the most beautiful places I've been to in the whole world. If you hit the next slide, just like it's saying, if the natural wealth of the Philippines were to be tapped and developed by the Filipino people themselves for their own benefit, it would be more than enough to sustain a population that is several times bigger than the present one. And if you hit the next slide. But something that we often say is that although the Philippines is rich in natural resources, its people are very poor. We say that the Philippines is import dependent and export oriented, meaning the Filipino people don't actually see the fruits of the land that they live on, the abundance of resources in the country, or even the products of their own labor, right? What farmers in the Philippines create with their own hands is taken away from them by big business owners who sell what they produce overseas at prices the farmers who created them can't even afford. The Philippines is also plagued by foreign corporate extraction projects where multinational corporations will come and steal the land and its resources. All of this being allowed by the Philippine government because of its economic stake they also hold in these projects. So if you hit the next slide. And because the Philippines is so rich in natural resources like we just learned, including a significant oil and gas deposits, the US has a deep economic interest in the country. And in 2011, a leaked cable from the US Embassy in Manila said there are over $1 trillion worth of untapped resources in the Philippines. 1 trillion is a number I can't even quantify or conceptualize. And where are these minerals to be found? They're to be found right under the ancestral lands of Indigenous and peasant communities in the countryside. For many generations, Indigenous peoples in the Philippines have been organizing to stop mining, logging, and agribusiness corporations from stealing their land. And instead of meeting their demands for their basic rights to land and livelihood, the government responds with militarization to aid these corporations in their theft of natural resources. So if you hit the next slide, we'll see a beautiful video. This is the Cordillera, which is a region in northern Luzon known as the watershed cradle, with its major river system supplying fresh water, its rich mineral deposits and majestic forests. The indigenous people in the Cordillera are called Igorot, which means mountaineer in Tagalog, as the region is also known for its beautiful mountain range and rice terraces, as you can see in the video. The Cordillera has long been occupied and controlled by multinational corporations and the military, ravaging the islands with destructive mining projects, dams, and monocrop plantations that have had devastating impacts on indigenous livelihood. Indigenous peoples' ancestral lands continue to be treated as a resource base for profit by the state and private corporations at the expense of indigenous people's self-determination and human rights. Despite their opposition against corporate projects, the region remains blanketed with more than 100 mining applications, and if these projects push through, it will mean the ethnocide of the Igorots, so the indigenous people, and the massive destruction of the environment. Specifically, the Igorot have been waging a campaign against Chevron, the corporation Chevron, for its environmental destruction and displacement of indigenous people through the building of hydroelectric dams on their land. And so this is actually an international campaign that will be launching in the US and locally in Portland next month. And the people of the Cordies have really been under attack by state military troops and their attempt to secure big mining, logging, and coal energy operations. Thousands of people are victims of harassment, ransacking, torture, forced evacuation, and even extrajudicial killings. If you hit the next slide. And because of this state violence, in 2018, the Philippines was actually named the deadliest country for environmental defenders in the whole world. And then in 2019, it was just named the second most dangerous, just behind Colombia. And then, of course, we know on top of all of this, the Philippines is on the front lines of the climate crisis as extreme weather events like typhoons and severe droughts are getting worse each year. When I was there in January, there was a really horrible typhoon that just completely destroyed the neighboring communities, the really poor peasant communities. If you hit the next slide. And so this is Brandon Lee. Maybe you can give a shout out if you've heard of who Brandon Lee is before in the chat. But Brandon Lee is a San Francisco native who moved to the Cordilleras to work full-time as an environmental defender about 10 years ago. And he was shot outside of his home last year in front of his daughter and sustained life-threatening injuries, but ended up surviving with permanent damage to his spine. This attack against Brandon came after years of harassment, surveillance, intimidation, and death threats by Philippine military and police as a direct result of his organizing work. And we know that Brandon's story is not an anomaly, right? But rather the calculated result of the president of the Philippines, whose name is President Duterte, a result of his counterinsurgency program, which targets unarmed activists as terrorists and silences legitimate dissent. And President Duterte just passed a new anti-terror law, which is being called unconstitutional and essentially death to democracy in the Philippines. And this law broadens the definition of terrorism, opening the door to abusive interpretations. It criminalizes terroristic intent, which is also subject to abuse, as no reliable standard exists to prove one's intent. And so this law essentially criminalizes any form of dissent, whether it's protesting in the streets, attending an online protest like we are right now, or just an online event or a meeting, making a post on Facebook criticizing the government, being suspected of joining a legal mass organization like 350 PDX or PCHRP. And if you are suspected of any of these things, just suspected, you can be held in prison and tortured for up to 24 days. And if you're proven guilty, you can be sent to prison for life. And with the passage of the anti-terror law, the repressive and militarist rule of the Philippine government will only worsen the situation of the Cordillera peoples and all indigenous and land defenders in the Philippines. The law is a graveyard for activists and innocent civilians, and a serious threat to ancestral land and resources, since it will pave the way for full implementation of destructive projects. So if you hit the next slide, there's just about a 6-minute video we'll watch that was filmed a few months ago of Brandon. So we hear directly from him about his story and also about the anti-terror law.
1 week before I was shot, I was visited by the 54th Infantry Battalion. They were asking questions to my staff about my daughter, how much money was I making, where am I now? And on that day I was shot, I took my daughter and her cousin home. After eating dinner, I went outside to feed the dog. But I was shot. It sounded like thunder. I fell to the ground. my spinal cord. Just couldn't move when I was on the ground. Brother-in-law came out. He went to bring me to the hospital. Yeah, I really thought I was gonna be dead. My name's Brandon Lee. I was a volunteer for the Ifugao peasant movement before being shot by the 54th Infantry Battalion, State Security Forces. I was living in the Philippines for 10 years. I went to the Philippines to help Indigenous peoples there for their human rights and to defend their land, life, and resources. For the work I was doing as a community journalist and as a human rights defender, I was under surveillance.
We have been harassed, intimidated, threatened with death threats.
Because of my work, I was shot August 6, 2019.
Critical pa rin ang kondisyon ng Chinese-American national na si Brandon Lee. Binaril ito ng 4 na beses sa kanilang bahay sa Lagao, Ifugao noong August 6. May tama ito sa likod, mukha at braso.
We're just taking it one day at a time. Mag-survive siya.
Well, the anti-terror bill will create an anti-terror council, and that council, composed of military men, will determine if you are a suspect of terrorism, then they can jail you up to 24 days. And also, if you're found guilty, you can be put into prison for life. Also, there's widespread surveillance that they can do to you for up to 90 days. And this is all legalized. And more people will be found guilty under the military brand. Those who are like me, environmentalists, human rights defenders, or community journalists, an activist or ordinary person, can be found as being a terrorist just from speaking your mind. Anything that you say against the government can be considered terrorism. So really this takes away civil liberties and democracy. I'm not down yet, so I'll still continue to fight. I continue to speak out and lend my voice whenever I can, in whatever capacity. Sadly, more people have been locked up than tested in the 30-day lockdown. And we call on everyone to support and defend press freedom. You should not support the anti-terror bill because it will take away your civil liberties. And with this bill, it will legalize everything that happened to me, including the shooting. No one should be shot at. To the Filipino people back home, continue to fight back. The anti-terror bill is unconstitutional.
Sa iba't ibang klase ng pagsasamantala at pasistang atake ni Duterte sa sambayanang Pilipino.
People shouldn't be afraid. People should act now. They should take to the streets. They should take to online protests. If you care about your fellow people, you should not support the anti-terror bill.
Okay. So that's Brandon. And like I mentioned before, the anti-terror law that Brandon was speaking out against actually passed and went into effect last month. And already in the last 40 days since it went into effect, we've seen a devastating increase in violence at the hands of Philippine state forces. There have been more killings of human rights and land defenders, more military troops deployed, and more aerial bombings of indigenous communities. I mentioned earlier that I was in the Philippines for a few months earlier this year, and in just the 7 months I've been back in the US, 3 of the organizers I met while I was there have been murdered, all youth organizers. The US government directly enables these fascistic attacks by training counterinsurgency operatives and funding the armed forces of the Philippines with our US tax dollars. And so if you hit the next slide, despite documentation of state-sanctioned violence, mass displacement of indigenous people due to aerial bombings, and the harassment of human rights defenders, the US continues to provide security assistance to the Duterte government. Duterte's violence against his own people is like a copy-paste from the United States war against social movements, both inside the US and against people in countries all over the world. COINTELPRO, which targeted the Black Panther Party in the 50s and 60s, has deeply informed Duterte's most recent counterinsurgency operations. And as environmental defenders in the US, we know all about the Green Scare and the different tactics the US used against our own people. And we can see the same tactics they're using in the US, they're also using against the movement in the Philippines. The same things that are happening in Portland, right? They're happening in the Philippines too. And heightening fascism in the Philippines mirrors the heightening fascism in the US, because the Philippine government is just a puppet of the United States government, right? The United States holds economic, political, cultural, and social control over the Philippines. And so it makes sense that when we see fascism heightening here, it's also heightening there. And not only does the US provide military strategy and training to the Philippines, but it funds its armed forces with our own tax dollars and has given a total of $550 million in military aid since 2016. The bullet that shot Brandon Lee and paralyzed him from the neck down, the thousands of bullets that have murdered indigenous peoples, workers, mothers, and their children fighting for their right to land and self-determination was no doubt paid for with our US tax dollars. And so if you hit the next slide, this is why, as environmental and climate justice organizers in the US, we must be in solidarity with land defenders in the Philippines, right? Because it's our duty to stand against the violence driven by our own government with our own tax dollars. And because we know the only way we will win is if we unite to build a movement to confront and defeat our common enemies, right? The same corporations causing destruction in the US are doing it in the Philippines, which is directly enabled both by the US and the Philippine governments. The climate crisis knows no borders. The systems that created the climate crisis knows no borders. And so our solidarity and people's movement must also be international. And so if you hit the next slide, this is why PTRIP has taken up the campaign to pass the Philippine Human Rights Act, which would suspend US security assistance to the Philippines until human rights violations by Philippine security state forces cease and the responsible state forces are held accountable. And we're very excited because after over a year of hard work, we have actually found a congressperson who will introduce the bill and help us to push for a human rights hearing on the Philippines. And so what this means for us in Portland is that we need to pressure our representatives Blumenauer and Bonamici to also sponsor this bill, take a stand against human rights violations and rising fascism in the Philippines. And so if you hit the next slide, I want to invite folks to join us in lobbying our representatives. The congressperson who is introducing the bill will be coming out a letter this month asking others to sponsor the bill. And so as soon as it goes public, I would love to share and work with 350 PDX to send emails and make phone calls to their offices. Last month, 350 PDX mobilized to lobby Representative Blumenauer to sign onto a letter to the Philippine government condemning the anti-terror law, and because of that he did sign on to the letter, which is such a huge victory that we could not have won without the work of 350 PDX really lobbying our Blumenauer. So huge. And in addition, this month, next month, iTrip is partnering with 350 and our partners on the ground in the Philippines, in the Cordilleras, to organize a webinar on heightening fascism in the US and the Philippines. And so we'll have speakers from the Cordilleras and also Brandon Lee on behalf of iTrip US. And so I hope folks will join us for this opportunity to hear directly from folks on the ground in the Philippines. And then lastly, the organization I'm with will be hosting a mass orientation where we'll be talking even more about the situation of land defenders in the Philippines, the work of our organization, and how folks can just stay tuned with what we're up to and how to stay involved. So we would love to have folks join us, and you can register at the link on the screen or that Deneen just dropped in the chat. And then if you hit the next slide, I actually have been sharing with our partners in the Philippines that we've been working closely with 350 in the US, and that I would be sharing their stories with all of you today. And it made them so happy to hear this. As things are rapidly getting worse there, their people are facing increasing attacks, mining projects are being pushed forward even during the pandemic, organizers are being killed every week. And for them, knowing that there are people around the world who are watching what is happening and are standing alongside them just raises their spirits so much. And so that's why I really wanted to invite folks to take a photo all together to condemn the attacks against land defenders in the Philippines and to stand in solidarity with them, that we can actually share with them and let them know that we're here with them. So if you had a chance to just grab a piece of paper, feel free to get it out, take 5 seconds to write any one of these 4 calls on that paper. And we'll take just a quick photograph together and then close out, and I'll pass it back to our amazing facilitators. And you might have to unshare your screen when folks are ready just to take the photo. Try to figure it out. Wow, there's so many of us.
Thank you so much, Jessie. That was so moving.
Yeah.
Oh, look at all these.
So beautiful, everyone. Okay, take 5, 10 more seconds. When you're ready, you can raise your sign, you can raise a fist if you feel called to. Okay. 3, 2, 1. Joseph, put your fist up, I see you. Okay, and there's so many of us, I have to get the second page, so just hold it for 3 more seconds. 3, 2, 1. Wow. Amazing, everyone. Thank you so much. I'm excited to share this with folks in the Philippines. They'll be so happy. And in the National Democratic Movement, we say padayon, or onward together in the fight against fascism, against corporate plunder of the land, against the climate crisis, and towards our collective liberation. So thank you so much for having me today, for your solidarity. Long live international solidarity. I'm not sure if we have enough time for questions. Sorry if I went a little over.
Yeah, we definitely do. We can take 2 or 3 questions. So thank you, Jessie. I see one from Tom. You have to unmute yourself first. Do you see the microphone? Oh, you got it.
Am I unmuted now?
Yep, yep.
Thank you, Jessie, for a wonderful presentation. I just have one small criticism, that we need to understand that the United States and in the particular interests that run the United States have been in the Philippines for over 100 and some years. Mark Twain, 124 years ago, wrote a number of stinging essays and writings about brutality. I'm in Oregon. What eventually became the Oregon National Guard was sent there as volunteers, and they helped butcher 700 of the people. And he reports that, and it was so. And you need to do your history, understand this human trafficking and brutality that has persisted. And we're going to have to sharpen our solidarity movement to ever overcome the inertia and the traditions of discrimination and exploitation. We're going to have to study really hard, work together, and figure this out. And once we start doing that, more people will be attracted to us.
Yeah.
This is how we will find our own humanity.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tom. You're so right. We only had like a little less than 30 minutes. I wish if we had more time, we could get into exactly what you're talking about, Tom, the deep history of colonization in the Philippines. You're absolutely right. And I hope that moving forward, folks can continue studying together. If you're interested, we could do like a follow-up meeting, or you're always welcome to join any PCHRP meeting so we can continue really deepening our understanding of the history and the role of the US in the Philippines. So I really appreciate it, Tom.
How important is it to defeat Trump, given that the United States is supporting the Philippines and him, Duterte, so much? I mean, it strikes me this is just like Israel and Palestine, but that's a whole different topic. But with Trump in office, he's going to keep doing this because they're two of a kind, two peas in a pod. So probably goes without saying, but I just thought I'd throw it in.
But you know, this was a problem a long time before Trump got in. I mean, I'm not saying that I'm a Trump supporter, but this problem is bigger and older than that one stupid old man.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I see a couple questions in the chat. Chris, you had a question?
Yeah, my question was if the Philippines solidarity movement has been working with the Black Lives Matter movement in Oregon, and what that looks like, if so.
Yeah, I think, you know, we've seen things really heightening in Portland the last few months, definitely PCHRP as well as the other national democratic organizations locally have been showing up regularly to the mobilization downtown in solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement, because we do have the analysis, right, that like fascism in the US is directly linked to fascism in the Philippines, and it's so important to build that international solidarity between people's movements, right? We have to fight for the collective liberation. And so, yeah, there has definitely been solidarity between our organizations and the Black Lives Matter movement locally.
And I see some more like logistical questions about how people could help. From Felice, are there particular corporate pressure campaigns that we should be paying attention to?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So locally, you know, like I was mentioning, in the Cordilleras, the Indigenous people have launched a campaign against Chevron, which they've been waging for, I think, over 10 years now. And so in the US, we're also launching a campaign in solidarity. And so PCHRP, our environmental justice desk, will be taking up a campaign to target Chevron and hoping to launch next month. I saw a few questions around whether there's like a toolkit ready. We haven't quite launched yet, but definitely we'll update you as soon as we have more information and actions and next steps for the campaign to target Chevron mid next month.
Awesome. And I think we just had one final question from Sue about if there's groups like P-Chirp across the U.S. and other cities.
Yes, there are many different chirps. I think there may be like in 6 other cities across the United States. There are lots of us. There are also a lot of different organizations in Portland who are part of the National Democratic Movement. We have Joseph and Janae from Anak Bayan here who are with Anak Bayan, which is a youth and student organization. There's Gabriela, there's Migrante. So there are so many different people's organizations fighting for the Philippines across the US.
Amazing. Let's all unmute and give Jessie a really big round of applause. We've learned so much from her. Thank you, Jessie.
Thank you. Thank you,
Jesse.
Incredibly informative and inspiring, and yeah, there's going to be more ways for everyone to take action in solidarity with folks in the Philippines that we'll be sending soon. So thank you so much, Jessie and P-Chirp and the folks from Anak Bayan on this call. So glad to be working with you all. Awesome. I'm going to now pass it over for the next part of our meeting to Chris.
Hi, it's me, Chris. Hi, everyone. My name is Chris. I use he, him pronouns. I'm the 350 PDX volunteer and communications manager. And for the rest of this meeting, we are going to have just some quick announcements, and then we're going to hear from each of our teams, and then we're going to try for the very first time to do something called virtual team tabling. It's going to be pretty sick. But first, let's have some announcements. And if any team leads have any announcements, feel free to add that into your blurb in a minute, because I don't have any team-specific ones. But we are going to do these general meetings monthly. We've not had them for a little while. We've been like COVID and virtual, and it's hard, but like now we're like doing it. We're going to do it every month. And the next one's going to be on Monday, September 21st, 6 o'clock. So mark your calendars, September 21st on Monday. And this one right now is the first for a while. It was a bit of a test. So if you have any like suggestions about what you would like to see in it, or what kind of like topic you'd like for the next one, then like put it in the chat or give us an email. We'd love to hear it because we don't know what it's going to be about yet. Cool. We're also going to start, because I see there's lots of new people or new-ish people on this call. We're going to start the monthly volunteer orientations again, which we've also kind of not done that consistently recently because there's a pandemic and there's an uprising and it's like summer and it's like hard. But we're going to start doing it every month. And it's called Climate Movement 101, and it's great. And I just kind of finished it last night and finished updating it for the new era. And it's going to be sometime in September. So look out for that if you're new or you've just been around for a while. And it's got some like, it's not just for new people, it's for everybody who wants a refresher. Yeah. All right, I'm going to pass it to Indy, who's going to chat about the BIPOC caucus.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, so I'm here to announce that we are relaunching or restarting a BIPOC caucus of volunteers and staff and board members at 350. We're just trying to create a space for BIPOC folks, that's Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, doing work at the intersection of climate and racial justice. We're getting together for the first time in a while on Thursday, September 3rd from 5 to 6:50 p.m. We blocked out 2 hours because we want to just take a good long amount of time and get to know each other, but we may very well take off a little early that evening. So if you're interested, we're going to have some information on our social media. I think we're going to have an email coming out, but you can also shoot me an email if you want to make sure that you're included in that, if you identify as Black, Indigenous, or a person of color. I'll just drop my email in the chat right now. Go ahead and shoot me a message and we'll make sure you can be there.
Thanks, Cindy. I'm going to pass to Deneen to talk about the Solidarity team.
Yay. So we are also starting a new team called the Solidarity team. that works on campaigns that are at the intersection of climate justice, immigration justice, global solidarity, like the presentation we received from Jesse this evening, racial justice, and being in solidarity with Indigenous communities, and many more different topics. The climate crisis just exacerbates all of the existing injustices that plague our society. So there's, you know, a lot of different ways that we can be in solidarity. And so we've been doing this work, you know, in different ways here and there, but haven't had like one clear campaign team that really held all of these campaigns. So now we're launching that, and we're gonna have our first interest meeting about the team, just to talk about it and how it should be structured and what kind of campaigns we want to work on. So if you're interested in joining us at that first meeting, that will be sometime next week or the week after. We haven't decided yet. Please drop your email in the chat and we will reach out to you. Yeah.
Anything to add?
Nope.
Cool. All right, so we have lots of new and newish people on this call, like I mentioned, which is great. Who is new on this call? Can you, or like newish and isn't really involved in the team that much? Give us a little wave. I see hands, I see hands, I see loads of people. Hi, thank you for being here. Usually we do like a big cheer and everyone would like applaud, but you know, everyone's doing that on mute right now. Thank you. And back in the day when life was normal and we could do real life things, we did this thing called team tabling, which was like probably the best bit of the general meeting. And what it was that a team lead or a representative from each of our teams would stick around at the end of the general meeting, like by their table with some like info about their team and some like materials and like some cool art that they made or whatever. And it was aesthetically pleasing. And you could just like go up to them after the main bit of the meeting was done and have a chat, and like whether that's you're a new person wanting to find out more about that team or whether you've been around forever and you just want to catch up and see what a team is up to. And it was great and it was fun. And now we're going to attempt to do that virtually. Yeah, what could go wrong? So each of the teams is going to give just like a little update about an intro to the team, what it's been up to, kind of how to get involved, like when the next meeting is, that kind of thing. And if that's like enough and you're like, great, I love that team, I'm going to show up, then like write it down and then show up. But if you want to like chat with that person a little bit more, find out a bit more information and just make friends, then you can put the name of the team into the chat, and then we'll put you in a breakout room with the team person at the end of this meeting. How could that go wrong? Everybody clear? So there's like seven-ish teams here gonna give a little intro. And so if a team floats your boat and you want to chat to them a little bit more, put their team name in the chat. And I'll post all the team names so you can have a little look. But we're gonna start with, let's start with the Defund Divest team. Sue and Jennifer, one of you wanna chat?
Yeah, I think that's me. Hi, everybody. My name's Sue Palmer, and Jennifer Schramm and I co-lead the Defund Divest team, and we are all about following the money. So we know that the fossil fuel industry is getting money, both investments and funding of new projects and ensuring of those projects. And so we are in coalition with national groups all over the country, folks that are interested in really following the money. And so we're part of the Chase Coalition. The Chase Bank is the largest funder of fossil fuels in the world. And we are in coalition with the National Stop the Money pipeline. So it's trying to stop that money pipeline. And also, so it's investments, insurance, and funding, along with divestment, like college and institutional divestment. So we bring all that information to our team disseminates it, we get it to Deneen and Chris and to newsletters, and also take action on some of the things that are happening. We're very involved with the Chase Coalition, so right now our team has worked on a national Chase takeover We did one in April with Earth Day, but this is a bigger and better one that's going to be launching in September, and you'll hear about that. Everybody will hear about that. But we're also doing some research right now at the overlap of Chase Bank and issues related to racial justice. So, you know, Chase may be funding police brutality bonds and redlining, you know, kind of disparate funding for folks of color versus white people. And so we're just starting the first steps of doing that kind of research and understanding how what we have been working on is comes together with what folks of color have been dealing with for a long time. So the last few meetings, we've just been meeting and having discussions about books and articles about racial inequality and how that intersects with climate. And it's been a really great team meetings, and you're more than welcome to join us. We meet the third Thursday of every month, and we are starting up some divestment with OHSU and Meyer Memorial Trust work, and so there's lots of work to be done, and we'd love to have anybody join us. I know some of you are already on the team. I'm glad to see you, but feel free to join me on that. Thank you.
Thanks, Sue. Let's go to the fossil fuel. Actually, no, let's go to the arts team because Donna's here and she's got to leave in a minute. Donna.
Hey.
Donna, hey.
Hi there. Hi. I do have to leave in about 5 minutes. And I'll say a few words, and if Audrey and Carol want to join in, I don't know who else is here from arts team, but arts team has been going on for about 6 years now. We've done a bunch of really cool things. You don't have to be an artist to be on the team, but you do have to have an interest in showing complex ideas in visual ways, and upper body strength is a plus. We could really use that sort of thing, but also ideas, good ideas, and now with the virus, we're kind of hamstrung. We're going to be talking about that tonight in about 15 minutes. We're kind of hamstrung with social distancing and all that. We'll talk about that tonight. We'll also talk about inclusiveness in our team, in a variety of inclusiveness in our teams to follow the theme of this summer. And we'll be talking about that tonight too. Please jump in, Carol or Audrey. I'd love to hear from you. If I missed something, please.
Yeah, sure. I would just love to add that we're not just artists and designers, but we're also puppeteers and dancers and chanters and singers. And so it kind of runs the gamut of a lot of different things. If you have those interests, we would love to have you for sure.
Thanks, Audrey. And Chris, we didn't really connect about how somebody might connect with our meeting tonight, which starts, like I said, in 15 minutes. And I'm not sure how that's going to work out because I've sent out the Zoom meeting thing, tech people.
So Audrey has an idea.
I can go ahead and just copy the Zoom link and the password in our chat for anybody who would like to join us at 7:15 this evening.
Cool. Great idea. Cool, wonderful. And Carol, did you want to say something?
No, I was just going to say something very similar. So thank you, Audrey.
Yes.
And yes, come join us. We do have a lot of fun, or at least we did when we could get together and make a big mess of things and come out with gorgeous puppets and posters and stuff. So
screen prints. Okay, terrific. Okay, one real quick thing. I'm sorry, I'm doing this on this, right now. But if Audrey or Carol want to stay on, I'll get back to getting the meeting together. If you guys wanted to meet with art people, anybody interested in the art team, how's that sound?
I think anyone interested in the arts team can just hop off this call and join the arts team, which starts at 7:15. The link is in the chat. I recommend that you copy that link and put it somewhere because when the Zoom call finishes, that'll all disappear and then you'll have lost it forever. So do that, Beth and others. Cool. Thanks, Donna and Audrey and Carol. All right, Deneen, fossil fuel resistance.
Yay. Hey, everyone. I'm Deneen, again, campaign manager here. So the Pacific Northwest region where we live is the barrier between some of the dirtiest and most polluting fossil fuel reserves in the continent. So that's tar sands oil, fracked gas, Bakken shale crude oil, and in between that energy, that fossil fuels moving to customers overseas, they have to get through the Pacific Northwest a lot of the time. It's the fastest way to go. So that's why our work on the fossil fuel resistance team is so important. Over the past decade, the climate movement in our region here has stopped dozens of fossil fuel projects. So coal terminals, gas pipelines, gas terminals, gas power plants, and we've made it much more difficult and costly for companies to continue to try to push these projects through as hard as they can. So join us on the fossil fuel resistance team to work on some of the most crucial parts of stopping the climate crisis, keeping fossil fuels in the ground. We work to stop major proposals here in Portland, like the Zenith Oil Terminal in Northwest, and also across the Pacific Northwest region, like the Jordan Cove LNG pipeline in Southern Oregon, and the Kalama Methanol Refinery in Washington. We've won before, and we're ready to keep on winning. So I hope you'll join us. We have monthly meetings on the second Tuesday of every month. And you can join me later or drop your email in the chat if you want to learn more.
Thanks, Deneen. Let's go over to Indy for the Green New Deal team.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. So I'm here tonight as the staff rep for the 350 PDX Green New Deal team. We provide education and advocacy for Green New Deal policies across the board. A Green New Deal will transform our economy, provide good, well-paid jobs for everyone, and put an end to the climate crisis is our vision, and be grounded in climate, racial, and environmental justice. So right now we're working on performing outreach to neighborhood associations, to faith-based organizations, and other communities to raise awareness and foster involvement in promoting and advocating for Green New Deal policies, everything from energy democracy to universal preschool here in Multnomah County. We're also looking forward to tackling some new work pretty soon in coordination with the Oregon Just Transition Alliance. It's a coalition of communities of color and other supporting organizations working towards a just transition to a green economy for the state of Oregon. And we're going to be gearing up for some new work this fall and looking forward to the 2021 legislative session there. And our next team meeting is actually tomorrow night from 6:30 to 8:30 p.m. on Zoom. If you'd like to get in on that, just go ahead and drop your email in the chat with Green New Deal or GND, and I'll make sure you get that invitation if you'd like to attend.
Nice. Thanks, Indy. Let's go to Felice for the Forest Defense team.
Hi, my name is Felice Kelly, and I'm one of the co-leads for the Forest Defense team. And our main mission is to use forests, especially here in Oregon, as a tool both to directly sequester carbon to fight climate change, and as a tool to mitigate the effects of climate change by preserving ecosystem integrity, which helps promote clean and available water, helps regulate temperatures in populated areas, and helps protect endangered species that are being ravaged by the climate crisis. And we're working on extending our work towards communities that live and work in the forest more directly to kind of help bridge the, greens versus industry divide to some extent. Our two main campaigns right now are around improving the management of state forests, the forests that Oregon state itself owns, and a smaller campaign around changing the city tree code to make sure that it provides tree protection in all city neighborhoods, including those that abut industrial zones. Our next meeting will be on August 31st, and we meet by Zoom. So the easiest way to join the team is probably to fill out the volunteer intake form on the website, or I think you could probably email Chris and he can shuttle you over to me, or stick your name in the chat with Forest Defense. I think that's everything.
Tom, you got a quick question?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. My generation has about exhausted itself in its quest for the stewardship of nature. But the young are coming on strong. So I would think you would want to think very carefully about what I'm going to suggest. At 350, take up this challenge of reaching out into the state of Oregon around pre-registering 16-year-olds to vote. Put the pressure on the state legislature. And then students, teachers would be interested in discussing this question, writing essays in the upcoming school year coming on. And September 21st and through the 24th is pre-registration week for voting, National Week for voting. So it's a timely, and most of the youth are very conscious. You don't have to teach them. They still have a lot to learn, but they're very, the overwhelming majority of the whole population is on our side. Keep that in
Interesting
mind.
question, Tom. We're actually, this week we're figuring out our plan to address the election, and whether it's getting people to vote or doing a get out the vote thing. There's going to be this national push with 350 groups around, because lots of us are 501c3s, and so we can't endorse candidates, so we can't like do stuff for Biden, and even if we wanted to. And but we can do get out the vote stuff. We can call people around the country who are like climate friendly voters and like tell them unbiasedly to vote. So you'll be hearing stuff about our election plan soon when we figure it out. Okay, let's go to,
well, in the state of Oregon,
county watchdog team with Indy.
All right, thank you so much. I am also here repping the City County Watchdog team. I'm hoping in a few moments here we're going to see Mike Rosen, who's one of the team leads, to speak to interested volunteers when we break out a little bit after all of this. But the City County Watchdog team here at 350 explores and ensures that our local climate policies are effective, that they're accountable, and that they're equitable. So we look at things like the Climate Action Plan, the 100% renewable energy resolution, and other related policies that I think we've touched on a little bit earlier tonight, like the fossil fuel zoning amendments. Right now, we're gearing up to get to work watchdogging the city's climate emergency declaration. By 2030, the city is aiming to be 50% below what the region's emission levels were in the 1990s, and we've committed to being at net zero carbon emissions by 2050. So the climate emergency declaration released earlier this year is the first step in the city's plan to get there, and we're going to be following it every step of the way to hold them accountable to their goals. We're also looking forward to getting involved with the fall budget monitoring process, or the fall bump, where the city is going to be revisiting the budget they voted in over the summer. If y'all remember, the cuts to the police budget, about 15 million, I believe, were far below what most of the community was demanding. And this is another chance that we may have to push the city to divest from policing and to reinvest in Black communities. So if you are interested in getting involved with that, our next meeting is going to be a couple weeks from now. I think we're going to be sending out a when to meet, and you can drop your email in the chat one more time with CCW or Watchdog, and I'll make sure that you get involved in that scheduling. We'll look forward to seeing you.
Nice, thanks, Indy. All right, it's time for the last team, the movement building team, which is my team. And one of the main things that we can do to get massive social change is to get lots and lots of people to take meaningful action. And so this team is all about how we do that at 350. How to bring lots of new people into the movement, how to make them feel welcome and confident and trained up, and how to connect them to meaningful action. So if chatting to new volunteers and putting together training and thinking about like big picture revolution movement stuff is up your street, then you should join this team, because it's my team and it's the best one. Just kidding, but also okay. So that's all the teams. I'm going to put them back in the chat. You heard a bit about when the next team meeting was. In theory, all the team meetings are on our website calendar at 350pdx.org, and I'll make sure that they're all on there coming up. So you can just go on there and it has all the instructions about how to get there. And at this point, everyone's free to leave if you want. If you're done and you're like, cool, I'm going to join that team, or I'm like done. But if you want to stay behind and chat to a team person, then type one of those team names into the chat, and we are going to put you in a breakout group with that person. It's going to work for sure. Maybe. So thanks for coming, everyone who's leaving, and that's pretty much the end of the main bit.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Bye.